Okay.
Do you want me to count you down, Mr. Bob?
You can start whenever you're ready. You're live.
Oh, okay. Well, hello, everyone. Hello. Thank you for coming on this fine evening. Today, we are going to introduce Professor Morabito! Now, he is new to the school, so, yes. Hi, how you doing?
Hello.
Some cool facts about him is that he is half Italian and Hong Kongese. His work has been viewed in New York Times, and his work is also in some galleries in Philly, Belgium, probably the Big Apple, since he was viewed in New York Times, and other cool places that you may think of. And my favorite fact that I found out about him is he's a representative of the Art Cake Studio Program located in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. Woo! Now on to you, Mr. Morabito.
Thank you. I actually just came from that studio program in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. It was a challenging drive, but I made it in one piece, so thanks for coming. Okay, I'm going to show some pieces of my work that's, I guess I unintentionally made it somewhat chronological. This is the first piece that I did when I was living overseas in Korea. That was one of the, spent quite a few years living overseas, over a decade actually. And I didn't, that also wasn't intentional to begin with, but this painting is of myself and other people eating live octopus, which is a thing they do in Korea. This is a painting of the subway. And I think most places I lived, the subway has always been a bit challenging at times. And I've also spent a lot of time commuting in traffic to whatever jobs I had. So even though I did this painting in Korea, it could be in one way reminiscent of the subway in New York. I'm always trying to work from memory to a certain degree. So I'm really big into the impressions something leaves behind in my mind. Those paintings just now, by the way, those were done in maybe 2006. This was done a couple of years later, but in the same vein. It's rather large, maybe 8 feet wide. It's kind of, I guess you can call it a brunch scene. It's very active with a lot of coffee drinking involved. So this painting, like what I said before, I'm usually trying to capture an impression of sorts. And sometimes I don't really know what I'm doing when I begin a painting. And I was kind of wanting to maybe capture something about the color scheme behind the background. I always look at the bathrooms have very interesting color schemes, all the cool greens and blue colors and the ceramic toilet. But a person I knew insisted that it looked like it was a figure playing cards. So either way, I was able to continue to call it the original title of the painting, which was Royal Flush. This is some of my figurative work. I used to, and And I still do actually, I'm very interested in trying to make paintings move. Of course, when you see a painting in person, there's different density to it, different transparencies. It's a natural object with the thickness of the paint. So there's a lot that can happen when you actually see it in person. I always view looking at art in person just like listening to live music. There's a sensation that you can only get from experiencing it in person. This is a very old self-portrait of mine. I did it around the same time. I do not have that many eyes, but I guess you can say this is, sometimes I have a title of the painting almost like as a joke to myself while I'm painting the painting. And the title of this painting is Eyes on My Back. It was just an expression that kind of stuck in my head, listening to other friends of mine talk about maybe people that are very aware of what's going around them, or maybe overly aware of what's going around them, having eyes on your back. So this is not something I intended to go into the painting. It just kind of came about as I was doing it. So this is some of my figurative work in terms of just drawing. I'm really interested in, as I said before, trying to make paintings move. And I guess the interest, or I guess the connection of how I came about to wanting to make paintings move is through Chinese landscape painting. So I don't know if you can see a connection between, let's say, figurative work like this and Chinese landscape painting. This is always something that I've just kind of gone on my own with. Originally, when I went to live overseas in Korea, I had an opportunity to do a apprenticeship with a calligraphy master there. So I was able to learn, I guess you can say, a very old school way of doing calligraphy, where the teacher would hit you with a ruler if you did something wrong. She never hit me personally, but I did get to see her and other students. I did this painting, this one, and the next one when I was at a residency in Hunan province at a place called Taihang. That was supposedly the place where maybe around 1100 years ago, where the first written record of what Chinese landscape painting should be was written. It's an interesting place. The mountains are very beautiful, and it's an interesting area because the area around the mountains, like in contemporary China, it's pretty poor, and it's a lot of coal mines. So you really do feel like you're going back in time when you get to the mountains. But I always saw, for some reason, in the Chinese landscape paintings, a type of figuration or certain growth in form, growth in something. Like, compared to, let's say, a Western landscape painting, I think it's more about, with the exception of some other ones like Turner, there's a certain stillness involved. I actually saw a lot of motion in the old Chinese landscape painting. This is a large painting I did, an oil painting, where I saw, and I've seen this in other places when I've gone mountain climbing before, currents. That is when people start piling rocks up on top of each other. And you see these little piles of rocks, and from the different mountain ranges, you can see these piles of rocks from great distances. And I always thought that these rocks actually look like people from a great distance. So I was always, you could say, inventing or finding ways of drawing people through drawing rocks. Is when I was at a residency in Vermont over the summer, maybe 2012, I think. There was this, I forgot the name of it, something called Cow Jerky or something. This restaurant somewhere in rural Vermont, where you could go there and you could order deer on the menu, and you'd see deer hanging with their heads hanging on the walls, and literally outside the window you'd see deer or elk walking across the street. So I thought that was kind of perverse, to literally see them going to eat out the window. But either way, it made me want to paint a deer. Based on someone's photograph. I guess a baby deer that got killed probably by a wolf or a coyote. So a lot of times when I pick these subject matters, I kind of like to pick my subject matter really spontaneously, where I think maybe I want to do, maybe abstractly, and then something kind of just hits me. I call this talk today Contemporary Icons, because I think normally something, the subject matter I pick has something emblematic about it. Something almost like a symbol that kind of just strikes me in a very spontaneous way. This painting in because it's Throwback Thursday on Instagram today. I posted this, so I figured why not put it in. It's one of the last paintings I did before I came back to the States. It's of trees. I always thought the trees when I lived in Beijing were very interesting because they were very old and also very, I guess no other better way to put it, but very toxic. Quite a polluted place. So, and they had a lot of fireflies there. So of course, I think context changes everything. Let's say if I was in Vermont and I saw a lot of fireflies in the trees, I think that's very magical. But in Beijing, when I saw fireflies in the trees outside my studio in the evening, for me, it just looked more radioactive. And they also have a affinity for plastic trees. So it was a game my friends and I would play sometimes to try to guess if the tree was plastic or real or not. These are birds. I like painting birds. I like painting fish a lot also. It's a little bit like an airline menu, chicken or fish. I have painted a lot of chicken also. I think this one I did when I was in Vermont. So this one is called A Fisherman's Dream. And did this, I guess you could say it was inspired by my pet fish at the time. His name was Edward. I think most fish should be named after English royalty. And an interesting story to tell you about this painting. I had this painting, part of a very similar presentation and an exhibition I had at the American Embassy in Beijing. And I was teaching at this university there, and one of my students, part of the Q&A afterwards, had a question to ask me. And I can't say he was the most bright student, but I noticed him wanting to ask a question for a while. He looked kind of nervous to raise his hand. And his question was, am I the one holding the fish, or am I the fish that just got caught? And I thought, wow, he really got me there. So, definitely taught me to never underestimate any of my students again. The answer is, I really can't say which one. It's one of those questions which can never really quite be answered. If you're painting someone else as an artist, are you really painting them, or are you really just painting a version of yourself in them? It's an artificial sea life painting. This one was one of the first big paintings I completed when I came back to the States, when I came back to New York. I had this part of this exhibition called Glossolalia 3 years ago in Brooklyn. This is a 9-panel painting on wood, and it's actually based off of a Pompeian mosaic. So of course the original wasn't as colorful, and it was all from stones. It looked very different. This is my interpretation of it. It was also an excuse for me to paint a lot of fish and learn a lot about the fish in the Mediterranean, just for fun. Painting was about the same exhibition. It's I have a whole series of other paintings and drawings of rats with pizza. So essentially, pizza rat. For me, I kind of see something like pizza rat as a contemporary icon. Icons used to be more stoic, more universal. These days, in the contemporary sense, I find them more trite. It doesn't mean that it's not self-revealing what society has to say. And well, the name of this painting is Pizza Rat with Wings. Because people call pigeons rats with wings. Self-portrait of myself. I still have this hat. So I started doing a bunch of self-portraits in New York based on some observation, a little bit through the mirror, but I was mostly just touching my face, almost sculpting. So I put my face against the painting, and I just feel my nose, and then draw under the nose, save it with my chin, pick up where it goes, and do like that. Previous painting was about life size. This is larger than life size. If I was to stand in front of it, I'd probably reach up to the hat. Maybe about 9 feet, 8 feet wide. this is my imaginary self of how I picture myself when I'm riding my bicycle across one of the bridges, going from Brooklyn to Manhattan, either the Manhattan Bridge or the Williamsburg Bridge. Like most bike riders, kind of have to be very defensive while riding a bike in the city. Kind of have like a "don't mess with me" face, which if anybody knew me, they could believe I wasn't really that intimidating, but on a bicycle I could always have that aspect of an intimidating person. I kind of have the, but it's also questionable what view this is, because the type of the hat is backwards. Is it really myself? Was it really just a reflection of myself or the rear view mirror? The either or part is kind of what I'm interested in. Another contemporary icon, coffee cup. I happen to be a big fan of drinking coffee quite often, maybe a little bit too much. So of course, I had this coffee cup in front of me when I was cleaning it, but in reality, I think I could do a pretty realistic painting of this just from memory, because I've been drinking out the same style cups since I was a little kid. This is a painting of my former rooftop in Brooklyn. It's I guess I don't know what it was, it's some sort of graffiti on the rooftop. It looked like ghost art Rastafarian, it's hard to tell. So this is a somewhat large painting, about 4 feet in size. I don't know if you can tell, but it's a t-shirt. The two little orange things on the side are hands going into the pocket of a pair of jeans. So I think with almost all my paintings, they look very different when you experience them in person. And it's usually something that you don't see right away. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. Some people, if they don't attention to them, this is a t-shirt, it takes them quite a long time to discover it. But once you see it as a t-shirt, it's difficult to unsee what you already know. That, I feel, is a little bit of a metaphor on quite a few things. This is, the name of this painting is called Appetite. It's kind of biographical. The top left cupcake was a place, actually no, the bottom right is a bomb that get in Chinatown. The left is a cupcake in this place where Mommy's in the village, and the chicken wing is from the Domino's that was 2 doors down from my studio window. I like to pick certain things, like I said before, randomly. So for me, it was just what stops that I think on the way to the studio. And oh, by the way, this is a very large painting also. It's maybe 6 feet high. So it's a giant mouth. And for me, it's one of my favorite paintings because, as you can say, a lot of people I know really dislike it. I think it's kind of, for some people, they find it very comical, and some people, they just find it very prolific. And I think that's kind of interesting, the fact that my depiction of an appetite could be somewhat horrific. which makes me think, oh, well, I guess an appetite isn't a pleasant thing all the time. So, you can tell with this painting, the last painting, and even the one before, all of them are about similar sizes. The composition is somewhat similar. I guess I've become a portal painter, where I feel like I'm painting windows or little points of view to a different world all the time. I did a series recently of airplane windows. The name of this painting is called France. It's just how I imagined a plane landing by Charles de Gaulle Airport would look like. Also similar composition. I paint vases. And the vases can function as a window to a different world or an object onto its own. This is a rather large painting. I realized recently that I was always very interested in Chinese landscape paintings when I was a kid, partially living in Hong Kong, because we actually don't see that many Chinese traditional paintings in Hong Kong. You see it in packaging of cookies or tea, maybe on furniture or vases, but you don't actually see the actual paintings themselves. When I went to live in China for 6 years, I also didn't get to see that much. I found that some of my favorite paintings were in Taiwan. So maybe I'll go to Taiwan one day. With that said, I think I was inadvertently influenced by a lot of the images in Chinese furniture. There's a lot of lacquer carving that happens. So these days when I paint, I probably paint mostly with knives, where I'm actually scraping the paint away. Spend most of my time taking the paint off rather than putting it on. It's a very wasteful way to paint, but it's the way I found works best for myself. An owl on a vase. This painting, the next painting is called Bird's Lament. I just like painting owls. I think they're kind of very magical creatures. An actual window with a sunset. Tennis ball. They started very similar to the airplane windows and vase paintings, but instead of actually becoming a portal or hole into something, it became a natural object instead. I also think tennis balls are kind of interesting, just the neon green color it has. If you actually try to hold it when you sweat it, all that fuzz gets stuck into your shirt. I did a series of avocado toast paintings last year. I had it in a show that I curated, just called the Food Show. And they came about in a very arbitrary way where there was this Avocado toast cafe near my studio in Industry City. And I was just hoping what people purchased. I never bought avocado toast myself. I think the cheese was $8, the most expensive was close to $30. I thought it was kind of perverse, the fact that we could spend that much money on avocado toast. So, painting avocado toast is a little bit of a, I think it's a very blunt political statement, which anyone in New York knows this. But just like the pigeonholing the pizza, I think outside of New York, it communicates in a very different way. But the bluntness of avocado toast being overpriced, for me, it's really just the initial impression, or the initial intent I had. Once I begin something, it takes a life of its own, and really it just becomes an excuse to put circles and colors together, and just to play with paint. So, this is my new podcast I started called I Know Strange People, and explores the idiosyncratic or the creative process. I used to exhibit a lot and create shows and do a lot of things. This past year, none of this is possible anymore. So, as everyone is doing a podcast, I decided to start one of my own. It was also a good excuse for me to try to play with music here. But I think it's been very productive, where I feel like I'm learning something from it. The last artist I interviewed, Steve, the name of the podcast is What Does the Hood Mean to Me? So he's a black artist who did a bunch of paintings of the Ku Klux Klan. And I realized in this interview I had, we were saying the word hood in more than one meaning. Either the hood in terms of the neighborhood, or the hood in terms of what the Ku Klux Klan wears. So, I thought that was a very interesting part of the interview. So, since the pandemic, I have been painting the lost pet ads around my neighborhood. I think beforehand, I thought these ads were very funny, just because, well, pet owners usually take the most, I guess you can say, cheesy or tacky photos of their pets. And the way the photos they would pick is actually post all over the place. And I guess after the pandemic and the shutdown, where I guess when everyone was shut down, they began to notice things in a different way. So all of a sudden, these lost pet ads became kind of a representation of society in general, and just how we're all faring during the shutdown. There's something about it that I feel I almost like the low-finess of it. The fact that someone would go and print something out of their own printer and just start stapling and taping everywhere. Something about that's very immediate. It's a sign of desperation. It also falls into line of everything else that I've been painting recently, where it's almost like a portal into a different world. So for me, I guess you can say painting lost pet ads, there's a there's a dichotomy involved that I'm interested in. They're very serious, but they can also be viewed comically. They're very personal in some ways. They're also right in public for everyone to see. This is a painting I did almost completely from memory. When I was riding my bike over to the studio during the summer, that wasn't taking any public transportation, and I just saw through this window, through this doorway, an old lady standing by the doorway, and something about that just kind of like imprinted in my mind. So I was able to, I passed this doorway all the time, and I never saw her again, but I was able to do it in memory. Painting of my old dog. And this is one of the latest paintings I finished. I don't know, has this ever happened to you before? But it's snowed a lot this year. See some heads nodding. And, well, I call this painting like trauma. Because it's not the best thing in the world when this happens to you. And that is it. So, would anyone like to have any questions or comments?
Yeah, thank you so much. We have a few questions for you. So how do you become flexible in color blending?
What was the first part of the question?
How do you become flexible in color blending?
Flexible?
Yeah, so I guess like comfortable. Yeah.
Well, I would say if you get too comfortable in colors, I think you might be in trouble. Over the years, I've had developed, I guess you could say, my own palette, where I like to use colors over and over again. I've painted and drawn a lot in life. I actually mostly paint now, you can say, maybe from memory or photographs or drawings. I do drawings and paint from them. But previously, I've done a lot of painting directly from life of actual people or landscapes or something in front of me. And I just match colors that way. And I mostly do it quickly without thinking.
Thank you. And then also how was your upbringing involved with the arts? At what age did you start drawing, and do you have a close connection to art?
Well, I guess as long as I could hold a pencil, I was drawing to a certain extent. My connection to art was something I just kind of fell into. When I was younger, I was actually more into playing music than actually making art. Although I was actually always painting and drawing in my own time, it took me quite a few years after I initially went to college before I decided I really wanted to pursue painting as a career. So it's one of those things where I guess if you wanted to have a little bit of a romantic view of it, it's not that I found it, it's more like it found me.
And last question, who are your favorite artists or your inspirations?
Well, painters all the time. In terms of painters, I could say, I say this for example because there's an exhibition coming up in Philadelphia, with Kunig and Constantine. Those are probably two very important painters that I admire quite a lot. Contemporary painters, I'd say someone like Cecily Brown. But I'm also influenced by a lot of things besides painting. I'm really into a lot of films. I like David Lynch films a lot. There's this French director called Claire Denis that I really like a lot. So, and sometimes maybe just whatever I'm feeling that day when I wake up.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank you guys for coming, and I just want to thank Professor Morabito for doing this presentation, and our Creative Arts neighbors and Bob for helping us set up the mics and lights. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having me.